I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Well, welcome to this podcast review for February 18th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
And thanks for joining us, everybody, as we head to Peru.
Heading to South America, baby.
Heading to South America, we're searching for the retired bears in the jungles in the Amazon.
I thought we were going to try and find the lost city of Z.
We could do that. We could go searching for the lost city of Z. I wouldn't mind dying with you in that context. Let's do it.
I feel like we'll die giving each other hard stares, like Paddington, right?
Exactly. Hard stares as we try to put the little bracelet through the slot, only for it to come back to us as
Gosh.
you would expect it would.
I was hoping it would just take his picture at the end.
I have loved these Paddington films. They've been really fun.
Paddington 2 especially. I feel like many people would sing that film's praises to the point that it just gets kind of annoying. We would certainly hear it from our editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini. It wouldn't end.
Who loves Paddington.
Oh,
Everyone should reach out to Dave and let him know how much you love it, because he is the biggest fan.
Yeah, and we should also clarify that comes with a big asterisk. He loves to hate Paddington is really what that is.
He loves to hate Paddington.
Yeah. But I really like these films, Paddington 2 especially. I will join the camp in that one, not giving any hot takes whatsoever. Very basic pick. I think it's as far as family films are concerned, I think it's one of the best that we've seen in quite a while. I think it's just a really perfect version of that type of film.
Paddington 2 was so good. It was so good when we saw that film back in 2017, 2018, whenever that film came out.
Yeah.
The first thing that I said was, I hope it wins Oscars. Like, it was.
There are some people
so
trying
good.
to push for it in that way too.
Yeah. I mean, it was glorious. It was really, really fantastic. I mean, I really liked Paddington, the first one, a lot. Really cute,
I did too.
Charming, of course.
Yeah. I
Paddington
didn't love.
2,
Yeah. Paddington 2 is great. I didn't love the Nicole Kidman stuff as much in that first Paddington. Really, everything involving the Brown family and Paddington himself was great. That was all great. And that's always been the great thing of this franchise here.
For sure. For sure. Paddington 2, though, seemed to find that, that lightning in a bottle.
That's
magic.
They had something with that one. Everything just clicked.
They caught
and
something.
a lot of
Everything
it,
clicked.
a lot of it might just be the Hugh Grant of it all too. I think that certainly helps.
Who was terrific. Absolutely. Loved him in that film as well. So we now cap off the trilogy with Paddington 3.
Cap off the trilogy. Apparently Paddington 4 is already in the works.
Okay, we're capping off the trilogy. You don't need to do another one. We capped off the trilogy with Paddington in Peru. He goes to Peru to find Aunt Lucy. So I guess with that, let's just go ahead and transition, since we're already talking about Paddington in Peru. It is directed by Dougal Wilson. It stars Ben Whishaw, Hugh Bonneville, Emily Mortimer, Julie Walters, Jim Broadbent, Olivia Colman, Antonio Banderas. I know there's that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Paddington in Peru, you'll never guess where he goes. You'll never guess it. But
Australia.
He returns to Peru. I bet you didn't see that one coming.
I did not see that coming at all.
To visit.
That would have been
his
a great sleight of
beloved-
hand. That would have been a great sleight of hand if the movie's called Paddington in Peru and he doesn't go to Peru.
Yeah, it's just a red herring. He just never goes. No, he goes to Peru to visit Aunt Lucy, who now resides at the home for retired bears. With the Brown family in tow, a thrilling adventure ensues when a mystery plunges them into an unexpected journey. The Lost City of Paddington. All right.
The Lost City of Paddington. I've seen a few people make the comparisons to the Lost City of Z with this movie.
Indeed. And I can see what they were saying.
I can see it too. I can see that. I've also seen a few comparisons to Apocalypse Now as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
at the very least, the sense of place of it all can certainly
Yeah.
make that comparison a fair one, to say the least.
Yeah. Yep. No, I totally get it. All right,
Mhm.
Brendan, what did you think about Paddington in Peru?
Well, to get back to those comparisons for just a second, I think it makes sense for a movie like this to have comparisons like that because it's pretty common for a franchise that's now 3 movies in to finally start to get a little bit bigger, to widen the scope a bit. Much like Mr. Brown when he sees that map for the Amazon just slowly inching bigger and bigger, and he calls it huge. That's kind of representative of this film when compared to the more domesticated feel of
Yeah.
Paddington and Paddington 2.
It's the sequel thing, right? Where we have to get away from the formula of what we've already done
Mhm.
and how can we accomplish that goal. And every sequel does this, especially when you get further and further into the franchise. We have to leave. We got to
Yeah.
go somewhere. And if it's not space, because that's where we're at now with Fast and Furious, we've gone all over the globe.
Pretty yeah,
We can only go to space now.
Toretto and his team have to go to Mars next or something like
Mars
that.
is the next logical step for them. With Paddington, we've been in London a few times. We can't just do London again. We got to
Mhm.
leave.
Yeah, we did prison, at least a prison in
Yeah.
somewhere within the UK, right? I don't know
Yeah.
if it was London, but this is the first to really break away from that British sense of place, right? Even though
Yeah.
it still
Yeah.
carries a lot of that same energy and a lot of those same tones, right?
Yeah.
I bring that up to say that I am all for this franchise going a bit bigger in that way. I think it makes sense. But we do have to talk about the elephant in the room with this movie. And I think this is going to be the big thing that affects people's enjoyment of it. Most notably, people in our film critic circle who know who these particular individuals are. And that is that this is directed by Dougal Wilson, who is a first time director. This film is not being directed by Paul King, who helmed the first 2 Paddington films. And the other thing, too, Sally Hawkins, who played Mrs. Brown in the first 2 films, is also not returning. She is replaced by Emily Mortimer. And going into this movie, I was really hoping that their absence wouldn't hurt my enjoyment of it. And I think that's going to be the thing that affects people more so than not, is whether their absence is severely felt or not. I did feel their absence. I really did. And I think that's the thing that makes the movie certainly the lesser of the 3 Paddington films for me. I think it's still charming. I like the story it tells, and I like how it still feels like a very natural expansion on really these movies functioning as a story of the immigrant experience. And I think this one brings a very new idea to coincide with those initial ideas and adds more layers to it. I just don't think it quite has the visual creativity to fully back up its bigness that it's going for. I just don't think it quite has that. By comparison to the unique trickery that Paul King brought to his previous films, this almost felt like a made-for-TV movie by comparison. And I really did miss the creativity that these movies tend to have on a visual level. But I was still moved by it because I love Paddington himself. I love what he represents. And I like what its thematic notions are on the immigrant experience. I think that's all still very good. I really wish I didn't feel that absence as much as I did, because I think visually and creatively, this one does not even hold a candle to the previous 2. And it does hamper my enjoyment of it. And I think the energy is just not quite as there.
Yeah. So when it comes to Paddington in Peru, we joke about this film expanding beyond the UK of it all, heading to Peru, as you might expect with the 3rd installment in a franchise.
Yeah.
And I don't mind that at all. I do think there's a lot to be endeared by with this film.
Yeah.
Paddington as a character, you can't help but deeply love him. Everything he does is goofy and charming and absolutely wonderful. The Brown family is impeccable in complementing that as well. And with Aunt Lucy being gone, disappearing, and that is our MacGuffin here, right? They're on the search to find Aunt Lucy.
Yeah, she's the lost city of Z.
She's the lost city of Z. I think there's a lot to like there, especially as this, unlike what we talked about with Captain America at our Brave New World conversation. This is able to take a character that we've seen twice and expand his search for belonging and what his self-discovery means. I think what's interesting, because you talked about how the first two films work as this great examination in a fun, playful way, obviously, but this great examination on the immigrant experience.
Yeah.
This is interesting because it is rooting Paddington to his home, but also going an extra step. Now, I don't want to get into too many spoilers, but what that extra step involves, the self-discovery that happens for Paddington in this film and the emotional layers of that, I think adds some wonderful complexity to this film.
I agree.
I do really like.
Yeah.
So I think as far as expansion goes, as far as franchise filmmaking goes, I think it does a great job of adding to what we've already seen.
Sure. I agree with
Now,
that.
That said, I do agree with you. The lack of Paul King is felt here. It just doesn't quite have the same spark or magic that the first two films had, especially Paddington 2. And that's less of a criticism of Dougal Wilson, and I think more so a compliment to Paul King and his vision for these films.
Yeah.
I think he was able to tap into them in such a great way that brought the best out of what a Paddington film could be. And Dougal Wilson does a fine job. I don't think this is terrible by any stretch of the imagination. I think he does a good job of still making a charming, playful film that, you know, unveils those thematic through lines that we just laid out there. It does it all fine. I just don't think it quite has the spark. And as much as I really like Emily Mortimer, and again, it's nothing against her.
No. Oh my
Sally
gosh.
Hawkins of it all is maybe
It's
an even
so-
bigger piece for me.
It's so distracting because I love Emily Mortimer as well, but there is no synergy between her performance as Mrs. Brown and Sally Hawkins' performance
None
as Mrs. Brown.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I do
It might as well
think-
be a different character.
It might as well be a different character. And the word that kept coming to mind for me with this film, because was trying to figure out how to articulate what that missing piece is.
Yeah.
And the only word that came to me was chemistry. This just doesn't have the same chemistry.
Yeah.
With it could be
That's a
Dougal
good word.
Wilson's direction and how it vibes with the cast and the character and everything. Again, it's fine. It's not bad. It just doesn't spark the same.
Yeah.
And the chemistry of Mortimer to the rest of this cast just doesn't have the same strength as what Sally Hawkins brought to it. And again, I love Emily Mortimer. It's just different. And I think because, and I have no idea if this was last minute or not, from what I read, they were trying to woo Sally Hawkins and she just would not accept
Yeah.
the role and coming back.
I think she had said she felt like she brought all she could to the character of Mary Brown.
So I don't know how early or late in the process that was. It would not surprise me, given these results, if that was somewhat late in the process.
Yeah.
And look, we're shooting in 2 months. We got to cast this character again. And oh, look, Emily Mortimer is available. Let's bring her in. That's how it felt to me. Now, again, I don't know if it's true, but regardless, that is the outcome.
Honestly, if that were the outcome, I would have probably preferred if they wrote Mrs. Brown out of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you do that with the rest of the Browns here. I mean,
I don't
guess
know
you could
either.
just say that she
Yeah.
is on a work trip, or I don't know.
I don't know. Or maybe turn Emily Mortimer into her sister or something.
Or that too. Yeah. 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 Mrs. Brown died.
Oh gosh, that's so morbid. Don't say that. but maybe, but no, like, okay, let's, like, if we look at this seriously, if, let's say, hypothetically, Emily Mortimer was brought in to play Mrs. Brown's sister for whatever reason, and Mrs. Brown was not here, that could have been a nice parallel to bring, an aunt-like figure to the Brown family, just like Aunt Lucy represents to the Paddington clan. So
I like where your mind is at. Mr. Brown was cheating on Mrs. Brown with Mrs. Brown's sister. They divorced and he married the sister, and now she's part of the family. Great.
So new title for Paddington in Peru will be Paddington in Peru, or The Scandal of the Brown Family.
Exactly. I think that would be a fantastic idea.
As terrible as that sounds, I would totally be in line to see that. Pure curiosity right there.
I know. That would be incredible. I don't know how you explain that in a children's film like this, but look, might as well. Go for it.
Go for it. Yeah. And I to speak to what you're talking about there, as far as this film just lacking that Paul King magic, or really that chemistry, because I think that's a great word to describe what made those first two films work so well, was just all of these attributes coming together to make what was a perfect concoction, which is just not here. But sadly, for a movie like this that is going bigger and changing its setting to the vastness of the Amazon, essentially, you kind of need to have someone behind the camera that's able to bring some creativity to the movie and bring an energy to it. And Dougal Wilson, I think, would potentially be a fine director, maybe if the right story came to him. But here, just the movie feels kind of static by comparison. It just doesn't have the mobility and the creativity of those past films. So when we get to some of the film's central action set pieces, or even some of its musical numbers, which have some clever bits in there, they're framed and staged in a way that just feels kind of plain, honestly. That's really the only way I can put it. And I do think that's unfortunate, because I don't think this story should have that kind of plainness. I think it needs more. And it's unfortunate, because I think narratively, I don't mind the story here. In fact, I think one of the best strengths of the movie is the script. I think the script is actually good. I like what it says about the immigrant experience and how it adds more to what those first two films offer, by basically suggesting, if you are an immigrant and you find yourself in a new home, where you're from and where your home is are not necessarily the same thing. Like, it gets to a point where those could be very different things. In a way, this is kind of a movie about dual citizenship in some ways. And I think that's a compelling idea.
But like, what you consider home, like where you're from and where you're at, that's one element of it. But there's a third component to that, given Paddington's upbringing, where he was born, like where he's truly from, is an added layer now.
Yeah.
And that I find fascinating. So like, there's like this trifecta of self-discovery that Paddington has gone through now. Where does his allegiances lie as far as his identity is concerned? I mean, obviously he's always going to align with Aunt Lucy and his upbringing with her, for sure. That's part of it. That's why he's on this adventure and why he feels so desperate to find her. But he, of course, lives in London, wants to be with the Browns. The whole opening of the film is about him getting his passport and feeling like an official citizen of London. And that means something to him. So what happens when you posit this third aspect of where you're truly from, that becomes this epiphany to him?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So like, I love how this film adds to it.
And you can tell that Paddington as a character is wrestling with that. Paddington has an arc in this movie, a very clear arc, and a lot of that is also due to how great Ben Whishaw is as the voice of Paddington.
So
he's too good. He's too good here. It's almost rude. But I love the way it explores those ideas, and even the revelation of what the film's central MacGuffin is. I mean, Aunt Lucy's kind of the MacGuffin, as you said, but there's also this added locational MacGuffin of what they call El Dorado, right? And the revelation of what El Dorado is, what the gold of El Dorado is, I think is pretty brilliant. The movie does stick the landing, at least narratively. It sticks the landing, which is why I was still moved by the movie. And a lot of that is also due to the fact that Paddington 1 and 2, those two respective movies, did the work in getting us to this point so that it does earn that ending. But man, I just really wish the journey in getting there was more was more cinematically creative and interesting, because I think these are movies that really are defined by that. It proves that kids' movies can have a really clever cinematic lens. And I love that for those first two movies, and I just wish this one had it as well.
No, I completely agree. And there's something about the filmmaking here that, while even in the context of Paddington and how Paul King unveils the drama, the conflict, the narrative, and obviously
Yeah.
it's all funneled through this lens of goofiness and Paddington finding himself in these incredible scenarios
Oh yeah,
where
it's very much Wes Anderson for the childlike audience.
and very childlike. And while it doesn't maintain that aesthetic quite, it's not quite there. I also feel like the way this film unveils some of those, the dramatic and narrative reveals that we get in this film,
Mhm.
it feels like it comes a little bit too late, as if
Yeah.
like
Okay.
the film thinks like the audience is going to be 10 steps ahead of this movie, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
Even in a playful way, like the way Paul King revealed those things to us, it felt like the timing was right when those things came. And here, I just feel like he was always a couple of steps behind. In terms of, again, the execution of what is there in the screenplay. Because I agree with you, the screenplay and the writing is great.
Yeah.
But I feel like the way it's kind of handled from a directional perspective is like the timing and chemistry is just not there for me.
It's a little off, and I think a lot of that too is, we've been seeing comparisons to movies like The Lost City of Z or Apocalypse Now, and while that is certainly there, I think the overarching principle of why this movie is being compared to movies like that is because this is perhaps the most self-referential Paddington movie yet. Because this is one that is making clear references to other movies. And when you're reminded of those things, maybe you can find yourself, at least for people like us who see a lot of movies, we tend to notice how this one is just 2 steps behind in that filmmaking side of things. Because like the final action set piece is referencing Raiders of the Lost Ark to Buster Keaton. There's even a Sound of Music reference, which is actually pretty clever early on. I did kind of like that. But like what being as self-referential as it was, it sometimes can get a little distracting when you realize how much the movie on its own terms is just failing to match that kind of energy. And that was noticeable for me as well.
What did you think about the inclusions of Antonio Banderas and Olivia Colman here?
I don't dislike them here. I actually think they're probably some of the stronger components from a performance standpoint and bringing some much needed energy that Dougal Wilson might not be able to. I think it's pretty interesting to see Antonio Banderas kind of playing another version of his character from Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in a weird way. I will say one thing I will give the film credit, and maybe this is more to do with the screenplay, but I think a lot of it is also to do with both Olivia Colman and Antonio Banderas' respective performances, is the reveals in how they play into the final act and maybe the potential villainry of it, I do think is the one moment where the film is maybe a few steps ahead of the audience, because it actually plays a lot with the idea that Olivia Colman's nun character, I can't quite remember her name. I have to look that up quickly.
It is Clarissa, or the Reverend Mother. They call
Reverend
her
Mother.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It plays with that idea that, okay, we shouldn't be trusting this woman. She says the word suspicious a lot. So we have to be very careful of that, only for the movie to kind of convince you that it's actually flipping the script, to then only go back to that very thing that it was flipping the script of. So it kind of does some pretty tricky things, but I do think that Olivia Colman and Antonio Banderas play into that playfully enough that I was always endeared and enjoying their presence. There's certainly no Hugh Grant.
Yeah.
It's not Hugh Grant level, and I don't know if they can be, but I at least appreciate what they were doing here.
I do think that Olivia Colman maybe underratedly comes close. I think she's having a riot, and I think a lot of it comes down to, I mean, some of it is, again, the chemistry or the lack thereof here it doesn't quite fully realize her performance. But I think Coleman and what she's doing is hilarious because she's using words like suspicious and
Yeah.
the way she acts there at the home. Like everything she does screams, this is who I really am. So what comes later on in the film is obviously not much of a surprise. But I do like how she kind of toes that line of, I'm being super obvious as to who I really am and what my scheme is. But she does it so confidently that you're taken aback by how she's trying to trick you.
Yeah. That's pretty
clever.
clever. That's pretty clever. So like I think she is very good here. And certainly when they're on screen, especially when they're on screen together in the end, it certainly makes up for the fact that Sally Hawkins sadly isn't here. Like when they're playing into their respective energies, Banderas and Coleman in particular, you kind of forget where those missing pieces are because they're bringing a new energy to this movie.
They are, and I agree with you. I mean, Sally Hawkins had something so specific to that role that, again, I really do like Emily Mortimer, but she can't capture the same spirit that Sally Hawkins brought to the role. And I don't know, like I struggled to get around it. I did.
If they had to recast Mary Brown with someone else, I think there's someone else in this movie that probably could have been a better casting job. There's a cameo from Haley Atwell at one point. And I was sitting there thinking, like, she probably could have been a pretty decent Mrs. Brown. At least like I think there's an energy that she brings that maybe more closely mirrors the delicacy of Sally Hawkins. And again, like, we're trying to be careful. We're not knocking Emily Mortimer as a performer. I think if this were the first time we were ever seeing the character of Mary Brown, it wouldn't be an issue. I think we'd be very endeared by the character.
Exactly. Yeah.
She just brings a very different energy that's a bit more almost innocent, a bit more childlike, maybe a little nasally by comparison, that just seems out of character from the character we've gotten to know. And she just can't bring the mirroring effect there.
Yeah. And they don't really do anything to address it. And, it's funny, we didn't really talk about this in our Captain America conversation, but in that film, they address it a couple of times that there's something different with Thaddeus Ross.
Mustache.
He looked different.
He finally shaved off the mustache. Now he looks like Harrison Ford.
Yeah, exactly. Like, which again kind of speaks to the problems of that film, because there's a line early on from, I think it's from Sam, where he says, I'm still getting used to the new look, or something to that effect, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, funny little jab. It's a new actor in the role. Ha ha ha. They do it again later on, like 3 scenes later. It's like,
it's like, just in case we forgot about it. But if there's any film franchise that's gonna do something meta like that, it makes sense to put it in the Paddington movies. So
and that's what I'm trying to say. Like, and the MCU has had to do this a couple of times when Rhodey is introduced in the second Iron Man film, right?
When Don Cheadle takes over from Terrence Howard.
Takes over. In the courtroom, again, there's a little moment there where he's like, yeah, it's me, I'm here, get over it, or whatever he says. So like, it's a fun little joke.
Yeah.
And I like the first one in Brave New World as well. You didn't need to do it a second time. I liked it enough the first time.
That's
but
fair.
My point in bringing that up is to say, maybe that would have helped me get over that hump if they did have a playful little gag about how, oh, Mrs. Brown, you look different. Did you get your hair cut? Or, whatever. Like, if they just did something, maybe that would have helped. But they don't. They just pretend that this is who it's always been. And because you're essentially the same character, but a very different performance, as you noted earlier, it just doesn't quite gel for me in the end. As much as I love the character, and obviously she's such a vital piece to the first 2 movies, and it just doesn't carry the same weight here. Other than, I will say, that moment at the end when Paddington is talking to the Browns about where he's going to go, and you get that close up there on Mortimer, her reaction there, I do think is quite poignant.
Yeah, I agree. But again, I think it's mostly working in the context of the moment in a vacuum. I'm still not sure I'm sold on that particular performance convincing me that it's still the Sally Hawkins iteration.
No, I agree. No, yeah, I agree. I think it's the context of the film, the way it builds to that moment, the trifecta, as we noted earlier, how that is crystallizing there emotionally for the Browns and for Paddington and thus the audience. All of that is accumulating for that close up there on Mary that makes it work great in a vacuum. I don't disagree there. Because the overall performance or the execution of the character here, it is missing something overall.
It is. Yeah, it is. And apparently they are already working on a Paddington 4. I hope that some of these key figures are brought back. Or if Paul King is not going to be brought back, at least I want to see someone that can at least match his energy. It doesn't have to be the exact same energy, but someone that can at least match the energy of the story at hand. If this were a more domesticated version of a Paddington movie, maybe Dougal Wilson could have been a decent choice. But this is an adventure film in the Amazon. I don't think those sensibilities really work. So we'll see what happens when Paddington 4 comes out. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I think that's where the Lost City of Z specifically, those comparisons are perhaps a little bit more apt, because you think about what that film is tonally, and it's not really an adventure film as much as it takes place in the Amazon. I mean, there's a lot to that film in terms of the relationship dynamics. You think about how reflective that film is throughout a lot of it. Now, this isn't quite that, but I bring that up to say that it doesn't have the energy of something like Indiana Jones, for example.
Oh, no.
That is not really what you get here. I do think it lacks that spark.
I will say,
I think it's fine. It just doesn't quite get there in the end.
There are at least a few moments here where the film did show signs of visual life. Really only, I don't want to say only two, but there were two that come to mind, and they're coincidentally really the same thing. There are two moments bookending the movie where a painting essentially comes to life. Those sequences, I think, are very creative. I thought those were really well done. There's a few nicely edited gags on the plane trip to Peru that I think are really well handled and well edited. And the way that the plane is utilized as like a piece of stop motion animation, I think is pretty cute. So there are moments here. I do at least want to give Dougal Wilson and his team some credit where credit is due. But I really wish that type of energy was also matched when, they're on this epic quest through the Amazon, when the boat tips over, when they're fighting the villains and the big rock is rolling towards them like in Indiana Jones, or when the rock wall falls like it does on Buster Keaton in The General. Those references, I wanted more visual creativity to, and where it counts, it just doesn't quite have it.
No, I agree. I don't think I have anything else to add.
It's not a bad movie.
With that.
Yeah, not a bad movie though.
Yeah, no.
I will say this: as far as kids' movies, taking your kids to the movies could do a hell of a lot worse than Paddington in Peru. I'd rather them see something like this.
No, I agree. I mean, I think this film is adequate. It's fun. It's charming. It's endearing. I think kids will have a ball with this, as they did the first two films. It just doesn't reach the same level of quality. But I mean, given a lot of what we get from the major studios these days, I mean, this is probably going to be up there as one of the better studio films that we'll get it. Given the trajectory of the major studios. Kind of a sad thought,
yeah.
It's been kind of bleak, but So anyway, that's Paddington in Peru. Of course, this isn't a Hollywood film. This is Studio Canal. So but still, Sony Pictures, I think, is distributing this in the United States. So
yep, they are.
All right. Anything else? Any final thoughts?
If Paddington 4, I'll still be looking forward to Paddington 4. I will. Just looking forward even more so to the talent that gets involved with it.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm kind of TBD. As much as I liked the film, I did. I really liked it. And if we were just concluding this as a trilogy, I think I would be perfectly happy with it in the same ways that I'm perfectly happy with the third How to Train Your Dragon movie. Is it as good as the first two? No.
That's a great comparison. This reminded me a lot of The Hidden World, like especially as we were talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you think about the trajectory of that franchise, as much as we rave about How to Train Your Dragon 2 and Paddington 2 being the best of this trilogy as well, there is a similar trajectory. And look, I really like that third How to Train Your Dragon. It's not as good as the first two for sure, but I think it's really good. And it's kind of the same way with this. I do think it is good. It is good. I enjoyed it. I would encourage people to go see it. It's just not as good as the first two. So I don't want to sit here and act as if my criticisms are completely weighing the film down. It's just a step down from the first two.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think as a result, like if Dougal Wilson is coming back for the fourth film, okay, I'm just going to be kind of TBD until we see a trailer.
Yeah, or an idea. Or anything else. Or if Sally Hawkins is at least coming back, if they convince her to come back, then maybe we can at least find some.
I mean, I would hope so, but if she feels done with the role, I guess she's.
I wouldn't be. Yeah, I'm with you.
So I'm not going to expect her to come back if they couldn't get her to come back for this one.
Yeah, seriously.
Conclude the trilogy at least, and then be done with the character. Who stops at 2? Come on, Sally.
Hey, I mean, if her heart wasn't in it, then I mean,
if her heart's not in it.
Yeah.
That's where you add a couple of extra zeros to her paycheck, okay? Come on.
I don't know if Paddington has the budget for that. I mean, the Golden Eldorado might be valuable, but I don't know if it's that kind of value.
No? Oh. Well,
it's more of a tasty kind of a value. Yeah. It adds a sugary sweetness.
Come on, Columbia. I know you're behind this. Add a couple zeros. Let's go. Stage 6. Come on. Let's work it out. Get her back.
Let's give Sally Hawkins what she deserves.
Exactly. I mean, I just don't know how you handle that with Emily Mortimer, if that's the case. Thanks for filling in, but we're going back to Sally Hawkins. I mean, look, movie studios have no shame. So
they've done worse.
Sit here and pretend.
They've done worse.
They will throw her to the street immediately if necessary.
That brings up a pretty good question. Has there ever been a case where a role was recast only to then be cast back to the original actor?
I don't know. I don't know.
It must have happened. I can't think of one offhand, but that'd be an interesting one to think on.
I'm sure it hasn't happened a lot if it has. That is an interesting question. I don't know. Well, I guess on that note, if you know, leave
please
a comment
let us
below
know.
if you're watching on YouTube, or you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for tuning in and listening.
Yeah.
We have a review of Captain America: Brave New World. We also talked about the MCU at large, so it was a little bit of a longer conversation, but we hope people go and check that out.
Absolutely.
Episode 624, we do a Harrison Ford character draft. That was great fun as well. You can let us know if Brendan had the best draft or if I had the best draft. It was Brendan. But
I know.
You can, still let us know either way. But go and check that out. We also talked a little BAFTAs. Speaking of, there's a new Chasing the Gold where Shadon and company talk about the BAFTAs a little bit further as well. Yeah. And there's going to be a new a new Women in Session, tomorrow. As this episode is released, you can be on the lookout for that. All right, Brendan, before we get out of here, any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I think we've said all we needed to say. I'm actually weirdly looking forward to next weekend. So we have a couple more. Well, we're starting a new movie series, right?
Yep.
That's going to be pretty exciting. And I'm looking forward to that. So be on the lookout
I think that's actually a good final thought.
Yeah.
We can tease once again that our Best Picture movie series is coming back. We started this last year, and we're going decade by decade because we can't just do 140 films in a row.
I mean, we could, but we're not going to.
We're not going to. We're doing it decade by decade, so 10 weeks stretch at a time. Last year we did the 1940s. Now's a great time. We are jumping around. So we started in the 40s. Now we're going to start with the 1960s. So for the next 10 weeks, we'll be going through the Best Picture winners of the 1960s, starting with The Apartment. So make sure you join us on the main show this next week for that. I think that is a good final thought. Absolutely. So with that said, thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. I'm going to go find El Dorado now. Head on over to
Called A Hard Stare.